Jamuna Tira His Divine Grace of Charananda Bhaktivinoda Swami Prabhupada ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur. Shri Shri Radha Govinda Go Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki, Shri Braja Bhumi Vrindavan Dham ki, Shri Mayapur Navadvip Dham ki, Shri Jagannath Puri Chaitra Dham ki, Ganga Mai ki, Jamuna Mai ki, Bhakti Devi ki, Srimati Tulsi Maharani ki, Samaveta Bhakti Vrinda ki, Gaur Premanandi. All glories to the Sama devotees, all glories to the Sama devotees, all glories to the Sama devotees. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Srila Prabhupada Lilamata ki. Chant Hare Krishna and fight. Whoa, way too loud. Hare Krishna. Is that a sound check, Jimmy? Are we doing a sound check? Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Ajay can just listen. You'll have otherwise you got to wash your hands, Ajay. So we're in volume 6 of Srila Prabhupada's Lilamrita. We're in chapter 8, and we started the next chapter, I have done my part. And we were discussing there was the storm. Let's see where we are. And we'll just begin from here. The first week in Rishikesh was idyllic, heavenly, with perfect weather and hopes of Prabhupada eating and recovering. But on the 8th night, a violent storm hit, and with the storm came a drastic turn in Prabhupada's health. He said the end was near, and he asked to go immediately to Vrindavan, in case Krishna wanted him to depart from the world very soon. The devotees in Rishikesh had been in high spirits, and so had Srila Prabhupada. While crossing the Ganges by boat, Prabhupada had requested drinking water to be fetched from the center of the river. He had liked the lodge provided by his host, and he had even gone into the kitchen to show his disciples how to cook. That's that famous picture. Prabhupada there with Tamal Krishna Maharaj. Word had spread through the pilgrimage tourist town that A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami was present, and Prabhupada had agreed to hold a darshan from 5 to 6 p.m. daily. The room had always been crowded at that hour with 40 to 50 people, including Western hippies and seekers, as well as Indians on pilgrimage or vacation. Although Srila Prabhupada's voice had been extremely faint, he had spoken with force, stressing Bhagavad Gita as it is. When an American hippie had questioned him skeptically, Prabhupada had replied, "You cannot understand because you are crazy." And when a lady had put forward materialistic welfare work as the highest good, Prabhupada had replied, "Your compassion is as valuable as blowing on a boil to heal it. Only a few disciples were with Prabhupada in Rishikesh, and they had deemed it a wonderful treat. Not only had Prabhupada directed the cooking, but he had told stories while cooking. He had said that only a lazy man couldn't cook. And then he told a Bengali story, the story of a lazy man. To illustrate, there was a king who decided that all lazy men in his kingdom could come to the charity house and be fed. So many men came, all claiming, "I am a lazy man." The king then told his ministers to set fire to the charity house, and all but 2 men ran out of the burning building. One of the 2 said, "My back is becoming very hot from the fire." And the other advised, "Just turn over to the other side." The king then said, "These are actually lazy men. Feed them." But on the evening of May 15th, Srila Prabhupada could neither sleep nor work at his dictation. The storm, a harbinger of the monsoon season, knocked out all electric power in Rishikesh. Since the fans were not running and the window shutters had to be closed because of the wind, the room became very hot. At 5 in the morning, Srila Prabhupada called for Tamal Krishna Goswami and said he was feeling weak. Tamal Krishna massaged Prabhupada for an hour. Even at dawn, the wind did not let up, and sand was blowing. The storm and power failure continued the next night. Tamal Krishna asked Prabhupada about the swelling in his hands and feet, and Prabhupada replied, annoyed, "Why you are bothering? It is my body, and I am not disturbed." Then he added, "From the material point of view, it is not good. Please consider how everything may be turned over to the GBC, so that in my absence everything will go on. You may make a will, and I will sign it." He was talking definitely about things that before he had only alluded to. Suddenly at 1:30 a.m., Prabhupada rang his bell, and Tamal Krishna and Shirachora Gopinath responded. From beneath his mosquito net, he said, "As I was telling you, the symptoms are not good. I want to leave immediately for Vrindavan." If it was time for him to pass away, he said, then let it be in Vrindavan. Since he wanted to leave immediately, the devotees stayed up all night packing, preparing to leave. Train reservations were not available, however, so they decided to go by car. Srila Prabhupada rode in the back seat of the small ambassador, sometimes stretching out on the seat. Upendra sat at his feet on the floor, while Tamal Krishna sat in the front seat, next to Damodar Pandit, an experienced driver who drove fast but with utmost care. Often Damodar Pandit would glance into the rearview mirror and meet Srila Prabhupada's attentive gaze. At one point, when Prabhupada saw a man selling cucumbers, he asked Damodar to stop the car. Cucumbers, he said, were good for quenching thirst. After 4.5 hours, they reached Delhi and stopped at the ISKCON Center in Lajpat Nagar. It was very hot. The devotees watered down the roof, and Srila Prabhupada rested there on a cot. By 5 the next morning, they were ready to set out for Vrindavan. At the Delhi temple, the devotees had given Prabhupada a large plate of the deity's prasadam, but he had only taken a few tastes. "Eating is finished," he had said. "I prayed to Krishna to be freed from eating and sleeping, and it is happening. I have already given up mating and defending. Now all these material activities are finished with." As they drove out of the city and into the countryside, Tamal Krishna noticed that Srila Prabhupada seemed more peaceful. "You look very happy going to Vrindavan," said Tamal Krishna. "Yes," Prabhupada replied. "Vrindavan is my home, and Bombay is my office." As they turned off the Delhi-Agra road, Srila Prabhupada saw for the first time the stone marker, Bhaktivedanta Swami Marg. They soon met up with Gunanava, who was waiting on a motorcycle, and who joyfully sped ahead to tell the devotees at the Krishna Balaram Mandir that Srila Prabhupada was here. At the gate of the temple, a big kirtan party, including all the Gurukul children, was gathered to greet Prabhupada with chanting and dancing. 4 devotees carried Prabhupada on a palanquin to the temple hall, where he offered his respects to the 2 lords, Krishna and Balaram. After the arati ceremony honoring Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada spoke briefly to the assembled devotees. "If death takes place," he said, "let it take place here." Seeing his demeanor and hearing him speak these unexpected words, some of the devotees in the room began to cry. So he continued, "There is nothing to be said new. Whatever I have to say I have spoken in my books. Now try to understand it and continue your endeavors. Whether I am present or not present, it doesn't matter. As Krishna is living eternally, similarly the living being also lives eternally. But kirtira yasya sajivati. One who has done service to the Lord lives forever. So you have been taught to serve Krishna. So with Krishna, our life is eternal. The temporary disappearance of this body, it doesn't matter. The body is meant for disappearance. So live forever by serving Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki. Live forever by serving Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, 14th chapter, texts 15 and 16. Is that correct, Bhakti Jimmy? I mean, according to that nice schedule there, it says, even though both have purports. We'll chant 15, I'll chant 15, and then we'll chant 16 together. Atame kuru kalyanam kamam kamalalochana arto pasarpanang bhumanamoghan hi mahiyasi. In text 16, we'll repeat together. Iti tam viramaricha. Please repeat. Iti tam viramaricha. Kripanang bahubasinang. Kripanang bahubasinim. Pratyahanunayan bacha. Pratyahanunayan vacha Pravridananga kasmalam Pravridananga kasmalam Etitang viramaricha Kripanang bahubasinim Pratyahanunayan vacha Varvadananga kasmalam. Please chant. Ititang viramaricha. Yanam bhavabhasinim. Pratyahanunayan vacha. Varvadananga kasmalam. Etitam viramaricha Kripanam bahubasinam Pratyahanunayan vacha Parvradananga kasmalam Etitam viramaricha Kripanam bahubasinim Pratyahanunayan vacha Pravridananga kasmalam Ititang viramaricha Kripanam bahubasinim Pratyahanunayan vacha Pravridananga kasmalam. Anyone else? Okay, we'll chant. Now we'll read the translation of both and the purport to both. Translation to text 15. O Lotus-eyed One, kindly bless me by fulfilling my desire. When someone in distress approaches a great person, his plea should never go in vain. Please repeat. O lotus-eyed one,
O lotus-eyed one,
kindly bless me by fulfilling my desire.
kindly bless me by fulfilling my desire.
When someone in distress approaches a great person,
When someone in distress approaches a great person,
his plea should never go in vain.
his plea should never go in vain.
Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Diti knew well that her request might be rejected because of the untimely situation, but she pleaded that when there is an emergency or a distressful condition, there is no consideration of time or situation. Text 16. O hero, Vidura, Diti, being thus afflicted by the contamination of lust, and therefore poor and talkative, was pacified by the son of Marichi in suitable words. Please repeat. O hero, Vidura, Diti, being thus afflicted by the contamination of lust, and therefore poor and talkative, was pacified by the son of Marichi in suitable words. Purport by Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. When a man or woman is afflicted by the lust of sex desire, it is to be understood as sinful contamination. Kashyapa was engaged in his spiritual activities, but he did not have sufficient strength to refuse his wife, who was thus afflicted. He could have refused her with strong words expressing impossibility, but he was not as spiritually strong as Vidura. Vidura is addressed here as a hero, because no one is stronger in self-control than a devotee of the Lord. It appears that Kashyapa was already inclined to have sexual enjoyment with his wife, and because he was not a strong man, he tried to dissuade her only with pacifying words. Om Jnanatam Randa Shagaranjana Shlakaya Chakshormalatim Tasmai Shri Gurvena Maha Okam Kalochi Magnutankai Yat Kripatamaham Bande Shri Gurum Dinatanam. Translation again. O lotus-eyed one, kindly bless me by fulfilling my desire. When someone in distress approaches a great person, his plea should never go in vain. O hero, Vidura, Diti, being thus afflicted by the contamination of lust, and therefore poor and talkative, was pacified by the son of Marichi in suitable words. Interesting. Seems to be a foregone conclusion. And this is just basically wordplay. Diti is speaking in such a way because she knows her husband will acquiesce. This is obviously not the first time. And she knows his inclination as it's described here. So therefore, whatever Daksha is saying is just, how can you say, formality. He's not really trying to avoid the situation. So this is an interesting perspective. Why even say anything? What's the point? But in order to maintain, and this is, we see that according to one's state of spiritual realization, then he may act based on his training, but without firm conviction. So we see that this is all that stands between the living entity and contamination from his previous sinful reaction. What's that verse? Nirvara sarva bhuteshu yasamameti pandava. That's that, huh? Free from the contamination of previous material activities and mental speculation. So this, and that's implied here, that this sinful this lust of sex desire as a result of previous sinful contamination. So we know that these, just like nowadays, everyone takes great care to wear a mask to try to avoid contamination, because he has some rudimentary understanding that maybe, just maybe, this will prevent me from infection. But this is, unless there's some real serious attempt at isolation. Maybe you've seen pictures of people who are working in a class 4 laboratory. Have you ever seen those pictures, Ajay? In Wuhan, where this virus emanated, the people who work there, they don't just wear masks. They have a complete isolation suit, which is self-contained. So there's no, and these suits are tested for negative pressure before entering into these areas where these viruses, live viruses, are worked on. So that perhaps might be some preventative. But a mask, you're just rolling the dice. In this situation here, one has a stock of sinful contamination from previous material activities. These things don't go away. They sit there like a forgotten bank balance. In a former situation, we used to do asset recovery. You'd be surprised how people forget about, inheritances, safe deposit boxes, bank balances. And we would get notices from the state. You subscribe to them, and they give you a list. And you get these lists weekly. And in Florida alone, on any given week, there's $1 billion in assets which are unclaimed. Cash, jewelry, property, all the safe deposit boxes that people have just abandoned or forgotten about. And we would find these persons and charge a finder's fee and then recover it for them. It's a very good sideline to private investigation. You did it on your downtime. But the point is that even if you forget that you have these sinful seeds sitting in your heart, these seeds will fructify without any external prompting. They're there. Just like when you plant a seed in the ground, you water it, sometimes you forget it. And all of a sudden, you notice this plant is sprouting in the garden. Now, how did that get there? Maybe it's a good plant, maybe it's a bad plant. So these seeds of desire, some people think that karma is good or bad, but there's no such thing. All karma is bad. Because if you have any residual karma at the time of death, you have to take birth again. And taking birth is not good. So that's why we stress becoming free from sinful activities, so that one doesn't take birth again in this material world. But that's back to the point of these stock of sinful desire seeds, which result in a situation where when one is confronted, as Daksha is confronted here, he has no real willpower. He has no real willpower. Not Daksha, but Kasyapa. So what is willpower? Just like you have these sinful desire seeds, which are lying there, dormant within the heart, gradually fructifying as they become mature, as they become watered by fruitive activities, as opposed to being nullified by spiritual activities, then one has to know, how do I keep these things controlled, under control. What is the means to develop this detachment? So this is the constant practice, within the spiritual realm of the various ashrams, including brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, sannyas, but one takes seriously the vows in each one. If one takes seriously his vows of brahmacharya, then he will never need to go into another ashram. But this takes a great level of determination. He has to be able to control the mind under all circumstances. And austerity will allow him to do that. Not trying to avoid, the opportunity to restrict one's eating or sleeping. Because in brahmacharya there's no question of mating. But defense is there. Even on the mental platform, one is trying to defend himself, his reputation, or his ego, right? People become, you see that this is not an easy thing to accomplish, to remain unaffected by the various, Vacha Vegam, Manasakota Vegam, Jiva Vegam, Udarapasta Vegam. Control the urge to speak and the mind's demands. The urge to speak. Everyone wants to speak. Everyone wants to be heard. This is their, 1 minute of fame, 15 seconds of fame. People want to be recognized. They want to say something pithy or poignant to try to stand out from the crowd. And this is just, like the peacock showing his feathers. You want to impress someone, or many people, on different levels, maybe on a family level, or a community level, or national level. Everyone has this tendency, and why? Because these 6 opulences, which are found in full in the Supreme Lord, are there also in the living entity. Wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation. Yeah, so everybody wants to be famous. We can see this. Everywhere you look, people are on social media trying to become popular, what's that term? Influencers. How many followers do I have? Let me check. 100,000, 200,000. And then what do they do with those? They try to monetize. So they're doing the fame, and then there's the wealth. All right, so they're going through these various stages and trying to imitate Krishna. All right, they're trying to imitate Krishna. Who is that in Krishna book? Pondraka? Pondraka. Did you read that in Krishna book yet? The guy came here, he had strapped on 2 extra arms to imitate Krishna's forehand in Narayan form. Right? So we're doing the same thing. We're just not strapping on those 2 extra arms or calling ourselves Vishnu. We're in competition with the Supreme Lord on our minuscule level. And it's obvious for anyone who wants to look and see that, you see a person who's proud of his speaking ability, proud of his dressing ability, just proud, period. They have that saying, a pauper is proud of his penny. So even the poor man is proud of something. So we have to be very cautious about how to keep this sinful contamination from manifesting in spiritual life. And that requires that the constant attention and diligence to not fall prey to the mind. And what is the mind saying? The mind is saying, telling the eyes to look here, telling the tongue to taste here, telling the genital to enjoy here. So this is the mind. It's just like whatever you want to call it, like we're the slave and the mind is the master. So there's a very complicated arrangement here. that we have to share this cranial space, the brain case, with the mind and the intelligence and the false ego. So this takes a little effort, to weed out the various influences, right? Just like those influences on wherever they are, Facebook, Instagram. The mind is trying to influence you to do what its bidding. And you have to be serious about resisting what the mind is trying to tell you. The mind, according to the Bhagavad Gita, is the best friend or the worst enemy. For most of us who can't control the mind, it's our worst enemy. It's telling you to do all types of nonsense. Don't come to the Bhagavatam class. Don't listen to the temple commander. Don't approach this person on Sankirtan. So we have to be very, selective. People have this is the business of the mind, accepting and rejecting. And sometimes it's accepting and rejecting the same thing multiple times in a span of a few minutes. Should I do this? No, I shouldn't do it. No, I should do it. No, I shouldn't do it. No, maybe I'll do it. Maybe I won't do it. It's almost, it would be funny if it wasn't so serious. Because sometimes those things lead one to do things which are deadly to the physical body. Should I take this drug? Nobody knows what's in these drugs on the street nowadays. Last year was the, used to be, they would say that car accidents were the greatest cause of death for people between 18 and 25. Because young people driving cars, not a very good mix, tendency to be immature, to drive fast, et cetera, et cetera. But last year, the greatest cause of death was overdose. Overdose. Which is in direct proportion to the amount of drugs flowing into the country and the lack of education, how to control one's senses. Good engagement for the mind. So how much more important is it for us to spread this message that if you want to stay high forever, then you have to have access to spiritual knowledge because it's permanent, it's eternal. Na sato vidite bhavo, na bhavo vidite sato. And so we're hearing this knowledge that's eternal, we're hearing from the Bhagavatam. And we're getting the benefit even in these so-called mundane situations, which we can just, we can understand just without much elaboration. That, what is that Prabhupada said very simply? Man is like butter and woman is like fire. If butter comes in contact with fire, it must melt. Not a question. So under all circumstances, one should not put oneself in a situation like that. So, but this is, in one sense, without putting too much shade on Kashyapa Muni, he's a sadhu. But at the same time, obviously, as Prabhupada mentions in the purport, if he's inclined to have sexual enjoyment, then he's really not a very powerful, strict sage. He's like these brahmanas you find everywhere who, jati brahmin, they're brahmin by birth, or by some seminal lineage, they're in the line of the parents, there's what's the analogy would be? A bar mitzvah. In the Jewish tradition, when a boy reaches a certain age, he gets inducted officially into all the ritualistic trappings of the religion. And in Christianity, you have communion and confirmation is another. Or in the evangelical, they dunk you in a body of water and give you baptism. And they actually call that second birth. Born again. Born again. So there's that concept there, to be born again, in all these different situations. But it doesn't mean anything. It's just a tradition. If one doesn't take seriously to the philosophy and understand what is the meaning of spiritual life, who am I, who is God, and what is our relationship, what is the ultimate goal, then it's just so much useless endeavor. Shrama eva hi kevalam. Useless waste of time. Atak pumbir dvija shrestha varnashama vibhagasaha sunustatasya dharmasya sangsiddhya haritoshanam. The goal is, regardless of one's caste or occupation, he has to satisfy Krishna. Then his life is perfect. And therefore, when someone in the official realm of religion sees that these Hare Krishnas, they're coming from Western background, they don't read the Bhagavatam. They don't read the Bhagavatam and understand it. They read the Bhagavatam professionally as a means of income generation. But they don't read it to understand it. And therefore, these such verses like that, Atak pumbir dvija sheshta, varnashrama vibhagasaha, it just goes right over their head. But it's clear here, just like it's clear in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna describes that. What is that verse? Chaturvana mayashishtam guna karma vibhagasaha. Chaturvana mayashishtam. These four varnas and ashrams, they're created by Krishna. It's not the caste system. Guna karma vibhagasaha. And the person is judged according to his quality of work. Who else said that? Martin Luther King. Person should be judged by the content of his character. Varna means color, not by the color of his skin. So Varna, that's why they call it Varnashram. So there's related in that way. So one has to understand thoroughly in order to be able to act practically. Otherwise, his acting will be on the platform of speculation. I think I should do this. I think I should do that. No. What did Prabhupada famously said about that? You know, Aiden? He said, if one begins a sentence with I think, he should finish it in a closet. It's not fit for dissemination. What's the point? That's why you always quote Shastra. Because otherwise, what is the value of my thinking? Who am I? But people are very proud of their speaking. Again, as we alluded to in the beginning of the class, one has to take care not to be like, Kashyapa. He's just speaking mechanically, really has no intention to avoid the situation. But, he's paying it some lip service. Because, the demigods are listening. There's 33 million witnesses to anything you do. Besides the moon and the sun and the stars. And so there's all the demigods. So nothing happens without being, just like now there's people complain about the surveillance state. That's there. People don't like it. But the fact is, everything we do is monitored by the higher living beings. So they see everything. Otherwise, how is it that we have such a variety of living entities that no two people are exactly the same, even identical twins? They're not exactly the same. Their bodies may be the same, but not their minds. Similar, but not the same. But this is all due to that, so the modes of material nature awarding you a body just suitable for you to express all these subtle, sinful desires that you haven't gotten rid of through the practice of Krishna consciousness. You will take birth according to that. Yam yam vapi smaram bhavam. Whatever one is thinking at the time of death, to that nature he attains without fail. Without fail. So if your whole life you surrounded your mind and your senses with various sense objects, sense pleasures, and sense memories, then it's inevitable that at the time of death you'll think of one of those pastimes. It's like we read Krishna book, Krishna's pastimes. Why? So that we can dream of Krishna, think of Krishna, remember Krishna. So at the time of death, we will have that, as opposed to the nonsense, what do they call that? Reruns of our material life. They say it flashes before you at the time of death, like a movie. In it, and this is, how long does death take? At the moment of death, of course, time is suspended on that level. Because you've exited now the realm of time, So momentarily, you get the chance to review your whole life. And then you fixate on one point, what you think is the happiest moment. And for everyone, the happiest moment is obviously different according to different people. But the fact that there is 8,400,000 species of life just gives you some idea. There's only 400,000 species of human life. The 8 million species are all, bugs, birds, beasts, germs. So that's a lot of variety, a lot of opportunity to go down on the evolutionary scale. Because most people are not thinking of a higher destination. So that's what we're doing here. We're training ourselves to avoid a situation. The term austerity is the wealth of the Brahmin. So what is that austerity? Does it mean that I can stand on the bed of nails that we have over in the corner here? Is that the austerity? Or is taking a cold shower in the winter? That's a bit of an austerity. Or is going out on Sankirtan under all circumstances and interacting with the fallen conditioned soul? That's also austerity. Maybe the greatest austerity. But the real austerity is to be able to control the mind. Because in every one of those situations, it is the mind that allows you to act consciously, you could say, independently almost, of the modes of material nature. Because if one has control, that control which is born out of spiritual practice will allow one to transcend, his material misgivings and contamination. So that when he finds himself there, instead of letting his eyes drink the youthful beauty of the half-dressed women in Washington Square Park, he'll turn his gaze inward. And remember the lotus feet of Govinda and the moon-like face of Srimati Radharani. This is your saving grace. Being able to see the deities every day, this is not an ordinary opportunity. People come for darshan from great distances to see, the deities once in a year, or once in many years. And we have the opportunity every day to imprint this transcendental vision so that any time we want to, we can access this. But we have to exercise that willpower. That's Brahma Tejas. That's the real. It's not that I can manifest some vibhuti or I can curse somebody or like that. No, it's being able to draw the senses in like the tortoise, like Bhagavad Gita. The tortoise can withdraw his limbs into his shell. So we can withdraw our external senses, not artificially. Although that's there. We see that, priests would undergo a certain level of physical self-flagellation. Is that how you pronounce it, Ram? They take those whips embedded with nails and they whip themselves until they bleed to learn how to tolerate pain, but that's not what's going to cause a fall down. What's going to cause a fall down is your inability to turn your gaze away from Maya. So we have to understand what is the most dangerous thing for our spiritual life in one sense. And it's being given us here in a very simple fashion by this one story from this one incident out of many, so this is all for our benefit. It is not a fairy tale just being retold to fill the pages in a book. But we're meant to take away that don't be like Kashyapa. What to speak. How many wives did he have? 13 wives? All sisters. So obviously this person was not a very controlled individual. But he's probably better than, because in our minds we have unlimited wives because we're thinking to enjoy every woman. So what's the difference then? He was limited to 13, and we're not limited to any number. We're limited only by our ability to focus. Vyavasayamika buddhir ekeha kurunandana. One pointed attention. This is required. It's not artificial. We're not trying to say you have to, beat yourself like the other show bottle practitioners. No, the real strength comes from getting a higher taste. Rasavajam raso pyasya param drisvandavartate. And it is not artificial. It comes by association with the pure devotee. One gets a higher taste. He sees, this is the life that I want to lead. Now we have so much, we're infatuated by these other famous people. And, bears mentioning again, there's so many, musicians or movie stars. Everybody's infatuated by these people. And they're fanatics in one sense, and many of them. They have terms for those persons. In the 60s, it used to be called groupies. But still, those persons exist, whether they call them groupies or not. And this is, and it's embarrassing to see another human being on that level, that he hasn't the discrimination to appreciate, what has real value and what does not. So we have a lot of work cut out for us to distribute this transcendental higher taste, especially on a day like Sunday where we're inviting the public to come in and they get a taste in every aspect of the transcendental practice, and they can see it in action. They may or may not understand it, but the impression will be there. Just like it was when I first came and I saw the devotees dancing and chanting. I could see that they were happy. I could see that they were more than happy, happier than I had ever experienced. But I didn't understand why. But I wanted it. I want what these guys have. Because there was words like bliss, sometimes they become hackneyed. People don't use them in the proper context. And bliss is a level of pleasure that's coming from the spiritual platform. It doesn't emanate from the material interaction of senses. That's inferior, like the rubbing of two hands. That's how it's described in the Srimad Bhagavatam, intercourse, like the rubbing of two hands. But if there was not such pleasure, then there'd be no progeny, there'd be no generation. And so therefore there's a situation that it ends in nothing. I mean, any mother will tell you that the worst pain in the world is childbirth. So after you enjoy, and of course, why do you think everybody wants access to abortion? Because they want the pleasure without the consequence, without the result. Yeah, but this is obviously detrimental for one's spiritual life to be part of the destruction of another life. It's a sacred, motherhood is a sacred task, but we don't give it the proper value, and so therefore it's minimized. So I don't think we can speak much more on Kashyapa and Diti here. Everyone gets the gist. Control the senses. Don't become a plaything in the hands of the opposite sex. Doesn't matter man or woman. Don't become a plaything. Simply just, seeking pleasure without understanding the reservoir of pleasure. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Govinda. The reservoir of pleasure. So we'll give this today. We'll give everyone a reservoir of pleasure. We have the little gift packs, punch out, and we'll stand there and ask who's here for the first time. And in that little gift pack there is a reservoir of pleasure or an on-chanting. The same thing. But reservoir of pleasure is a very potent pamphlet, and one should distribute these as much as possible. They're a great devotee maker. It's like an alarm clock to wake up the sleeping soul. Anyone who reads it is affected. Some to a great extent, some to a small extent. But no one is unmoved by it who actually reads it. So and why? It's because it's the words of the pure devotee. Without any material covering in between. Just like Bhagavad Gita, as it is. Here it is, as it is. The real nectar, the reservoir of pleasure. Read all about it. Extra, extra. Right? Do you remember those in the old days in the movie reels? Newspaper boys would stand on the corner and they would churn out, if there was an incident, because they didn't have internet, some guy in some newsroom someplace would yell, "Stop the presses. We're going to run a special." And then they would be distributed. And the newsboys on the corners would say, "Extra, extra, read all about it. Al Capone, caught. Such and such person, caught." These are the big things. This is the news and people are always hungry for these things. But we have the real news. And so we're doing the same thing. We're standing on the corner distributing the transcendental extra. News coming from the spiritual world. Like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said. And people were wondering how he could print something every day. He said, you can print unlimited information every day. It's unending, ananta. But people have no information how to do so. But Srila Prabhupada showed. And now you see many people are imitating. Again, because people want to be heard. But if they have nothing of value to say, then what is the point? It's just like the crows, the gathering place of the crows. They don't seek anything good. They're just looking in the garbage. So that's the material news. Everything is the same. Birth, death, old age, and disease, just in a different wrapper. There's a million ways to die, right? Maybe 1,000,001. They even make movies about it, right? Final Destination. Everybody remember? You can't avoid death. It'll find you. No matter what, how you try to avoid it, death will catch up to you. So the best thing is to confront death head on. Armed with knowledge, stand and fight. So any questions?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for such a nice class. I'm not sure if it was in the purport or in the verse, it was mentioned that Diti was affected by lusty desires. But earlier we were reading that actually she wasn't affected by more sex desires, but desires to have children. So I was wondering if maybe you could clarify this, what it means that she had a lusty desire. Is that lust for having children? Would that be considered like greed instead of lust?
Well, lust is just another side of envy. And it's related here that she was envious of her co-wives, who also happened to be her sisters, that they all had children and she didn't. So that's a very dangerous position. A person who's desperate will do anything. And here she's approaching her husband at a very inauspicious time. So bad for him, bad for her, bad for the child. Obviously bad for the child, as we see from the offspring. Right? So and that's how we should understand it. It's not that. Kama Esha, Krodha Esha, Rajaguna, Samubhava. These things are all connected. We don't have to get into it. Everyone has familiarity with it. That sex is not just for, procreation. People use it for domination, manipulation, all types of things. The whole society is controlled nowadays by pornography. It's totally influenced. You can get people to do anything. They have these, what's called a sting. You know what a sting operation is? Okay, you set up a situation in order to trap people. It's not entrapment because they acted on it. If a person does something that they would not ordinarily do by the influence of another, that's called entrapment. But if you set up a situation by putting bait or a lure and people go after it on their own, that's not entrapment. See, so they set up detectives who take the role of underage children, male or female, and they go into established chat rooms. They don't make the chat room. The chat room's already there. And they just start interacting with these predators, for lack of a better word. We can say alleged predators. Because if they don't act on it, then it stays in the mental realm. And technically in Kali Yuga, you're not responsible for that. It's not good, but you're not going to get tossed in jail. But if you travel to this sting house, because at a certain point, these detectives will say, my parents are out of town for the week. I'm all alone at home. Why don't you come on down? These people fly in from all over the country, thinking they're going to meet a 13-year-old boy or girl. And of course, there's Sheriff John Williams, 6'2", 230 50 pounds, who opens the door, and these guys, what do they come with? They come with candy and gifts and all types of, things that they shouldn't have, which further reveals their intentions. And who are these people? These are people who have become contaminated by sinful desires, by whatever, pornography, or this, that, that. So this is one of the most dangerous things right now in the material world. Destroying, the integrity of the male generation. Not so much the female, but the males. Not nice. We don't want a society of men who are, so easily pulled by their senses like that. It's not. You have to be self-controlled under all circumstances in order to be successful materially or spiritually. Anyone will tell you that. You have to be focused. So, this is, technically it's common sense, but common sense is in short supply. You'd think a mature person, these are not kids who are succumbing to these things. These are grown men. These are CEOs and, judges and lawyers and doctors and teachers. These are so-called respectable men in their community. But their discretion and discrimination and judgment has all been compromised by lust, sinful contamination, and like that. So yeah, it's a serious problem in today's world. And if we are doing our service properly by distributing this literature, we're saving the world. You can't make it any clearer than that. People want to reward the soldiers who are fighting in the battles, but the devotees don't get the recognition they deserve for going out on the streets every day and distributing knowledge which will actually save a person. Wars kill people. Even the so-called heroes like Vidura, they'll kill you. And of course the devotees are taking a risk by being out there. We know that. But we're not, disturbed or discouraged, because we know that this is a higher calling. And we're ready to do the needful to please the spiritual master Krishna and bring as many people as we can back to Krishna consciousness, to their original constitutional consciousness. And we have to be convinced of that. These are not just individuals walking around. These are spirit souls covered by the three modes of material nature. They don't know who they are. You ask a person, who are they? They'll say, yeah, I'm Jim Jones from, whatever, Greenwich Village. But they don't know who they are. They just know this body's history. So, great task lies ahead. And the first business today, of course, is get everything ready for the Sunday feast. Sometimes these things are not easy. But in that sense, duty doesn't have a label that says, this is good duty, this is bad duty. Duty takes the form of service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and whatever is required at the time. And, that presents challenges to those who are not convinced, because it's disturbing. It's disturbing, So we have to appreciate how Srila Prabhupada was flexible to the extent that he traveled the globe 13 times. But it's not just that he traveled the globe that many times, it's how he did it. 3 days here, 3 days there, 3 days there. It wasn't like he just took a jet, got off at one point and got off at another, no. He had 40 stops in between. And 13 times around, so 13 times around the planet. And in the beginning there was a few temples, and then there was 40 temples, and then 60 temples, and then 100 temples. And he was stopping in each one towards the end. Each one. You know, it's a lot to consider. It seems almost impossible that someone could do that. But, impossible for Srila Prabhupada was just a word in a fool's dictionary. So we're very fortunate to have access to this knowledge, eternal knowledge, coming down through this direct lineage. And that's another great boon to us. Uncontaminated, unadulterated, and pure. Right? Rajavidya, Rajaguyam, Pravichamedamuttamam, Pratyaksavagamam Dharmyam, Susukam Kartamavyam. This knowledge is the king of education. Right? It is the purest knowledge. What else? It's the perfection of religion because it gives direct perception of the self by realization. It is everlasting and joyfully performed, right? It was the most secret of all secrets. I forgot that. So we want to distribute the secret, right? And it's amazing. We're in a, they have these so-called secret societies. You read about them all the time. The Illuminati, I forget, the Council on Foreign Relations, this skulls and other, all these secret societies, right? But this knowledge is the most secret of all secrets. So we've already entered into that. This is something that very few people will have the opportunity because it's covered. You have to penetrate it with your intelligence through purification. So it's protected in that way. No ordinary person can get to understand it. And it's not just that we're flattering ourselves. It is the perfection of religion because it is practically realized. So it's a very, it's a great responsibility. What do they say? With great power comes great responsibility. But it's not our power. It's the power coming from the parampara. But yeah, it is still great responsibility to be able to take care of it and preserve it and to pass it on. Any other questions? Because I know we have a lot to do today, right? Isn't that correct, Chaitanya? Don't we have a lot to do today? Even though usually it's our day off, but because, we have to somehow or other get in the kitchen and be happy about it. Yeah. We have to follow in Matanga Prabhu's footsteps. Matanga Prabhu is happy. Happy to execute devotional service. Yeah. All right. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki. We can talk outside. Any question you have, I'm happy to answer. But I want these guys to go.